All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for still being here, joining me and DJ tonight. Now, DJ, you're an author, coach, and most importantly for tonight or this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are, a speaker. You are unfortunately not wearing your warm new vest. I saw on LinkedIn that you left your window open accidentally. Um,
Yeah.
but I guess you're all so excited about this session that you're warming up and you needed to promote your own brand. I get it. Now, luckily, we're all here at the right time. I noticed there were some scheduling thingies, but that's all worked out. Um, it's with pleasure that I'd like to introduce you, DJ. I guess if we look at the differences between us at Login VSI, we look at the technical side of users and people, and you're now going to take a more humane look at things. So, with that,
Yeah.
I want to wish you a fun session and our audience as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, as we go along here, folks, we are live, so I'd love to hear where you're from. So if you want to just put that in the questions, we'll kind of treat the questions as chat, and I'll kind of go through those and say hi to you along the way. Feel free to do that. Or if you have any questions along the way, feel free to do those as well, and I'll either do them as we go along or as we continue on at the end if we have time. We're also going to try a poll. So I'd like to see just exactly who I'm offending early on in the process. And so I'm going to open up this poll while I get started with my session here. Hopefully everybody else is able to see that on the screen and answer. As far as your team is concerned, what are you doing today as far as your processes? And so I'm going to be curious about that. So today we're going to go over just 5 basic things. One of which is just who I am. Who's this DJ guy? Why am I talking about our trauma? Of all the things in the world, why am I talking about IT trauma? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that eventually as well, but I wanted to give you some of the things that I've been gathering over the past few years. And I'm going to get right into why I'm hearing things like, oh, DevOps sucks, Agile sucks. I'm going to get into that a little bit and get into that and then actually get into a little bit of understanding the trauma that we're seeing in IT and how these all not only come together, but how we can prevent more of that and then just kind of provide a way forward. So let's see if we actually got any results from that. Then just trying this poll thing out, see if it works. But oh man, it looks like it didn't. All right, we'll just continue on. So anyway, glad to be here with you today. My name is DJ Eshelman, and I am from Franklin, Tennessee, which is in the middle of the United States, or as we say, South-ish. But that is not where I'm originally from. I'm actually, fun fact, I actually was originally from Colorado and grew up on not a farm, just a out of the nowhere kind of place with no electricity, no running water. It's just a very odd way to grow up, but hey, that's my journey. So when I was in college, I actually started working in IT services, which is really strange for somebody that kind of grew up with no electricity and no running water, but I was really fascinated with it. And so I started working in IT services in 97, and where Y2K really took off, and that was kind of my first introduction to a lot of things about IT, especially how traumatic it could be actually. And so that was actually my first little run-ins there. So actually, after that, I actually began traveling a lot and doing things in the field for many years, as early as 2000, 2001. And so started kind of a career in being an independent engineer and consultant. And then in about 2004, I actually settled down a bit and just decided to stay home for a while and work for a company. And lo and behold, like a lot of you out there, I'm sure, I got kind of voluntold. I got said, you need to be learning the Citrix thing. And I said, okay, great. What's Citrix? And so after that, I actually liked it and started doing that as a career and kind of focused on that in 2004 and actually ran several farms for a integrator in a small business area in Colorado. And so that was my thing until about 2011, when I decided to go big and actually joined up with Citrix Consulting Services as a resident consultant in 2011. And actually, I still do work for them today. Actually, if you see me out there in the field with Citrix, don't be surprised. I do still do services work for them as kind of a ad hoc kind of a thing, a relationship that continues to this day. So I've seen a lot of you out there, and that was actually a big impetus of why I decided to start moving forward with some of the things that I've done with blogs and things like that. Actually became a technology advocate in 2017, a login VSI advocate as well in 2019, I believe it was. I could be mistaken, made it in 2018, but continue that relationship to this day. I'm no longer a CTA, but I continue with Login VSI. It's a time commitment thing and a lot of things like that. But I actually began coaching more seriously in 2019. I was kind of doing it a little bit just to kind of feel it out in 2018, but in 2019 I really started doing that as much more of a focus, and kind of got much deeper into people's lives, careers, and actually found myself doing more life coaching than career coaching, which is actually fine. Actually kind of found I liked it. So I've kind of been merging the two for a while, and decided to publish 2 books in 2020. Spoiler alert, they've kind of been written before, but I just finally got around to publishing them in 2020. So Be a Citrix Hero has been a great, fun breakout kind of a book as far as that goes. It's been great to get people out there with some leading practices. Actually, the fun fact about this, in chapter 2, there's a conversation with Mark and I that is featured in that book, and then also some videos that are along with that. So a little fun fact about that connection there. But that's just basically leading practices, that sort of thing. And then in later in the year, I published my kind of current masterwork, I guess you could say, of Just Do This, a simpler way to succeed in IT, which is focused solely around the just the workings of IT. So there's nothing really technical in this book per se. It really is about just how to succeed by understanding all the things, how they put together, and actually understand what a methodology is, and how a simple one works. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And then I founded a little a group that is kind of finding its own footing at this point. We call it Thrive IT. And so I got a YouTube channel out there. We're going to be launching some new stuff in November. So definitely stay connected, and we'll see new stuff with that coming up soon, actually. So I'm looking forward to that. But let's start our journey, like all journeys in information technology seem to start, which is somewhere around 3 in the morning. This is actually in February of 2010. So it was in Colorado, in Fort Collins. It was very cold. In fact, it had just dropped below freezing. So imagine my surprise when I get a text message from an automated system that I'd put in place into a server room that it was overheating. Yes, it's below freezing outside and the server room is overheating. Apparently, when it gets that cold, the air conditioning shut off, stopped working. And so at 3 a.m., I was the only one that was available to do this. I had to get up in the cold, in the ice, and go deal with this problem at 3 a.m. Now, I had just gotten married. So my wife now knew the reality of living with this nightmare of a man called DJ. It kind of continues to this day, to be honest with you, but that was the harsh reality. In fact, she kind of got a warning of this on our honeymoon, when I got called to figure out, like, hey, how do we turn the server on? Got that call on my honeymoon. So a lot of lessons learned early on that I didn't really figure out a solution for until much later in life, but we'll get that in a minute. So first thing we have to do is kind of recognize these traumatic situations and what they do to us, and kind of what that means. So the first thing is that we have to recognize that we as IT people, we're working when others aren't. And that in itself causes a sense of drama in our lives. Like, why? Why are we being picked on? It's almost like a victimhood that comes out of that. And that's important to recognize. The other thing is that we're on call when others aren't. In other words, not only are we working, but we can get called into a situation, a crisis or whatever, when others aren't being called in. When the servers are down, nobody's calling the sales guys. It's just not happening. So they call us, right? So we have to recognize that's part of our system of trauma. There's also something that I've seen in my travels with people, and just asking the honest question: if you don't like this, why don't you quit? And there's always that saying of the golden handcuffs. It's a saying that I know it's common in the United States. I don't know if it's elsewhere as well, but it is where you're being paid enough money to where you don't want to leave, or your benefits are so big or whatever, the cost of leaving feels bigger than the cost of staying. Well, I call them brass handcuffs because when you look at them very closely, they're not actually gold. They're freaking brass. All right. And it's because the reality is we're working harder and longer hours and weirder hours than anyone else. And so, really, when it comes to the comparison of pay versus effort and trauma, it doesn't always work out that way. And so sometimes you have to recognize that part of our trauma is feeling betrayed by the very thing that's keeping us going in our pay and in our benefits. So we have to recognize that's part of our trauma systems. I'm going to get into this in another work because it's getting so much bigger that in talking with people about this imposter syndrome that so many people, including myself, often face. Really, what I'm finding is that this is something that's being kind of soft encouraged on the back end by culture, sometimes even by companies, because they want people to feel like they're stuck. They don't want them to feel like they can go anywhere else. I've literally seen this happening, and so this is something we have to recognize and get over. But we have to recognize that the imposter syndrome is often there. In fact, this is the unfortunate reality when the majority of people that work in IT look a lot like me. Yeah, if you know what I mean. It's like we've got a dominance of white males, and that oftentimes don't recognize that we're trying to be all bro and making it so that it feels like we're keeping other people down instead of bringing people up. Hey, you know what? I'm just speaking real truth here. I'm sorry if I'm offending anyone, but I'm not sorry. So that's just the reality of the world. So oftentimes, and this is probably a bigger one that actually is a day-to-day thing, is that leadership will change priorities on a moment's notice. And they won't really take into consideration what that means for us and dropping processes, having to stay up in the middle of the night and that sort of thing. And that often leads to us being blamed for things that aren't really our fault, is kind of a result of that very frequently, which is, well, I mean, let's just say it like it is. It kind of pisses us off, right? But that leads to a system of constant stress where we're perceiving stress when it doesn't actually exist. That's a classic sign of PTSD. And it was this year that I finally recognized that, oh my gosh, that's me. I feel that. I had a situation where a client was telling me that they were down. Had nothing to do with me at all. They were just saying that they couldn't meet today because they were down, and my heart went crazy, and my heart rate, my gut kind of felt like sick, and I felt like shaking, and I'm like, what in the world is going on? This doesn't affect me at all. That's PTSD. So we have to recognize this and say, you know what, this is affecting not only ourselves but the world around us, our families. When we can't switch off, when we can't get around from if we're on vacation, we're not really on vacation. We're still feeling like we're on call. We have to check in. So we're so afraid of all the things I just mentioned above that we can't really switch off for a vacation. This is not okay. So what I'm going to do today is kind of go through some things about what we can do about that. And first of all, I think a big thing with me is systems and methodology. And so I want to go through really quick what kind of was supposed to happen when it came to systems and methodology like DevOps and Agile and things like that. Really what you're supposed to be is a controlled methodology with a sensible workflow, that everybody understood, that we can collaborate on. And we had this concept of change control where we could, make sure that outages didn't happen or negative impacts didn't happen because we had a system around it. We have success criteria defined that says, okay, you know what? When it comes to what success looks like, here's what that is. And so we can actually look at that pragmatically. We have development handing off to operations on a regular basis. In other words, we have things where we are able to say, okay, left brain, right brain kind of operations are not going on at the same time. We're segmenting our workflows so we can be effective. So sorry, that was supposed to happen. We were supposed to have these systems in place so that people could take a vacation without worrying about their lives. But what's really happened is it's kind of like a do what I tell you ops. It's not really DevOps at all. It's because I said so, kind of things. The leadership just kind of, invoking their own veto power every single day. Or maybe it's just saying, just make the change in production anyway, because we're agile and that's what we do. And what the reality is, most of us in this space here are all in end user computing, and we know the truth that that crap don't fly. All right, it doesn't work. You can't just make it a change in an end user environment and hope for the best. It just doesn't work that way, because agile, in that sense of the word, doesn't work like that. That's just the reality. So we have this testing and production thing that's been very popular, and we've been talking a lot about cloud, about Azure and things like that, where you're supposed to be DevOps. But you know where I'm seeing the most testing and production? Azure. That's where I'm seeing the most of it, where there's not a test environment at all. They just throw things up there because it's expensive to have a test environment. Yeah, you can tell I'm getting my heart rate up on just about that. It kind of just it missed me. So testing and production is happening more now than it was 3 years ago. It's unbelievable. So, and this is something that I've seen happen so many times over the last 5 years. I just had to say something. When you have a morning Scrum session, and it's not about being productive, it's just about bitching and saying who's doing things wrong and how blah blah blah, and you end up with more meetings and more meetings and more meetings. This has exploded this year in a very bad way. I've been talking to so many people that have been challenged with getting things done because they have so many meetings they can't do anything else. And so I've been affected by this as an independent consultant in a really bad way. I mean, we won't get into that too much. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we talk about our calendar later. But yeah, this is something that's been happening, is more meetings than actual work done, because it's easier to bitch. So the other thing is unscheduled changes, because you know what? It's got to happen right now. This is the thing you can't ever seem to say to a manager or a somebody in leadership is, what I used to say to people all the time, that a failure of planning on your part is not an emergency on mine. So your failure to plan doesn't mean that I should be affected by this and traumatized by this. But guess what happens happening anyway? Because hey, they're the ones writing the check, right? So these unscheduled changes, all these things that have to happen right now, drop what you're doing, and they make it feel like it's your fault. It sucks. I don't like it. But hey, that's the reality we're living in. This concept of minimum viable product, yeah, maybe that works in software. It does not work in end user computing. People will complain. It's if you have it with a minimum viable, in other words, the bottom rung, then everybody's going to hate it. All you're doing is spreading misery. Ugh, hate MVP. I really do. And again, I'm almost trying to piss some people off today, but that's the truth. Look, this happens to most of us at some point. Somebody's going to promise something that we're going to deliver, but we didn't have any input on that process. So that's a thing that's happened with agile a lot of the time, is that there's this assumption that everybody can do it because compliments that they see us as superhumans that can do this kind of stuff. But reality is we're trying to get work done and keep things flowing in a human kind of way, not just doing whatever needs to happen because sales says it has to. Along this line is that kind of blame culture, the threats and things like that we really need to get past, because really what they're causing here is burnout and this culture of quiet quitting. So that's really been bad. So let's talk a little bit about preventing the trauma. I'll go through this quick because I wrote a whole book about this, but methodology matters. It's this concept of, first do no harm. It's a medical kind of thing, but it works in IT. Make sure what you're doing doesn't harm the people you're trying to serve. And no one's impressed with your complicated terms for your process and where you are. Your 30-point ITIL structure doesn't mean anything to somebody who's trying to sell your services, that sort of thing. So the way I put it, I call this the risk-less methodology, is understand, plan, change, and maintain. It's a 4-step process. You go back if you need to, but right now we're kind of focused on change because change is where the drama happens, and the other phases are what can help reduce the trauma during that change phase. But that's really what is critical here. So you need a pattern, and the one I usually use is, at its core, develop, test, pilot, and production, right? And this is something that we see even within Login VSI. There's great ways to do this and keep things running, but lowering the risk at each time. So you're taking the highest risk with develop when you're just IT, a slightly more risk when you're doing with application owners, for example, testing with them, slightly less risk with the pilot of small amount of production, and then full production should be low risk at all. That's the way it should be. So feel free to screenshot this, or the slide deck will be available as well. But if you bypass your methodology because there isn't time, the time will be made for you. All right, but it won't be on your terms. So this is important. You really need to get this. Is if you just say, okay, I need to do this right now. Yeah, you'll have time later, but it's going to come at a cost. It's not going to be when you would be able to do it or want to do it. It'll be those 3 a.m. calls. So it's really important to stay firm with a methodology. Another thing that's really key with this, and I'm going to race through this. Unfortunately, I'm probably going to be doing a whole series of videos on this later on YouTube, either later this year or in 2023. So stay tuned for that. But basically, it all started from a concept by a guy named Tim Ferriss that introduced me to this in terms of blocking off time for your calendar. And he said, okay, what's the worst that could happen? If you tell your boss you're not available from this time to this time every day, what's the worst that could happen? If you tell your customers you're not available from this time to this time, what's the worst that could happen? And really owning that and saying, you know what, actually, I don't think he would actually fire me for that. So I tried it out as an experiment, and it turned out I was right. I can, and in fact, I do this now all the time. I have very strict blocks on my calendar that says you cannot have my time there. And as you make that a practice in your life, that actually does work. And I know right now, a lot of people are shaking their heads going, no way, no, that's not true. DJ's lying to me. It can't happen. I will get fired if I even try. I bet you it's not. But what's the worst that could happen? If being fired is the worst that can happen, then deal with that. But another book that I'm to the point. I read this earlier this year. I'm going to reread it here in a couple weeks. I would almost say that, and this is dangerous for an author to say, but I would almost recommend that people, if you only chose one book to read this year as an IT professional, read Deep Work by Cal Newport. If you can do 2, then of course choose one of mine as well. But if you can only read one book, make it this one. This was crucial for this, and here's some reasons why. He's talking about minimizing distractions, let you focus intently, which in IT is actually more important than people think it is. If you're always just kind of looking for the next trouble ticket, you're not really looking at improving anything. So that focus actually does help. Routines got to be non-negotiable. If somebody wants to have a 7 a.m. meeting and you are taking time for yourself, for your own health, that's got to be non-negotiable. And so you got to make that a thing and make sure that the expectations are set. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Avoid busyness for the sake of looking busy. This is a sickness, especially in information technology, where we just stack things on ourselves so we can appear the hero. Yeah, okay, you don't have to do that to be the hero, okay? You got to be smart. Recognize your limits of your willpower. We think that we can just go and go and go and go. Red Bull will only take you so far. Red Bull may give you wings, but remember that Icarus guy and flew too close to the sun? Yeah, that sort of thing. It depletes daily, trust me. For people like me lately, it has actually been a bit of a challenge because it's been too much depletion. But we'll get there in another time. Keep score. In other words, look at what's happening from a pragmatic standpoint and kind of make sure you're able to improve. Getting management buy-in. I want to, if you're taking notes, write this down. Documentation allows for a peaceful vacation. It means that if you can take the time, get the time blocked off every single day to journal and document what you're doing and make that publicly available to everybody on your team, your likelihood of being disturbed on vacation drops dramatically. Okay, so documentation allows for peaceful vacation. It's huge. Learning is another thing to get blocked off. If you can't dedicate 10%, I'm just talking 10% of your time for learning new skill sets, you will stagnate in your career. You will not move forward. Do you really want to stay stuck where you are? If not, then you need to set aside time for learning, and you need to get management buy-in for that to say, you know what, I want to become a better employee by learning new things. They will appreciate it almost without fail. They will appreciate it. And if they don't, it might be time to find somewhere else to work. All right. Sorry, not sorry. Mentoring is another thing. If you can't take the time to mentor others, then you have a challenge. All right. And I realize that I'm running way out of time, so I'm going to race through this as fast as I can. there is a concept in coaching where agreements are better than expectations. So when it comes to dealing with management and getting that buy-in, it's really important not to be subject to emotions with this, because emotions are expectations, they can be changed. Agreements can't be. And so getting written down agreements of, hey, this is how we do things. That means that if management thinks that they can just give a change to you, they're assuming that you know the best way to implement this. And you should be not assuming that they know how you're going to do it. All right. You don't assume that they know the best way. They don't. You do. That's why you were hired. Find that win for them. Speak up when things aren't going right. And when you're faced with a conflict of the agreement, ask the management who agreed to it to either change what they told you or get it in writing that they are violating that agreement. It's important, and it works every single time that I've ever encountered it. Maybe there's some exceptions, but it works. Trust me. The other thing to learn here is how to play it forward. In other words, learn from the past. And in terms of dealing with trauma, this is actually almost some of my psychology degree coming out here. But basically, looking at these questions pragmatically of saying, what would this look like if I did this? And if I did this change in production, what would this look like? What's the worst case scenario, or what's a case scenario? And what does that make me feel like? And you'll notice that those triggers are trying to warn you about things that could be happening, and listen to them, speak up instead of just letting it go. So remember, reactive people are replaceable. Proactive people are promoted. All right. So there's lots more I could probably say here, and I'm not going to go into this, but basically getting the right tools in place, getting the right procedures in place are absolutely crucial for making this happen. All right. So if you have some proactive testing, there's a story I was going to tell, but I don't really have time, about how Login VSI was kind of cool with us and actually found a bunch of hardware that had failed, and we didn't even realize it had failed until we actually put the load on it. So we were able to deal with that before production actually happened. It was a cool story. But remember that proactivity begins with being a human that is serving humans, and you are that human. Screenshot this, tweet it. I'll tweet it out for you. Retweet it when I do. Reactive people are replaceable. Proactive people are promoted. All right. You can look at the slide deck to get this. There's a lot of things that go into this as far as communicating challenges to management. I welcome your questions about this. Just follow up with me. Don't be Brent. If you remember the Phoenix Project, if you've read that book, there's this character in there that called Brent that actually just took on everything and just tried to make all these unscheduled changes and all that kind of stuff just to be important, and kind of breaks down. So don't be Brent. Just remember, it's not what you take on that'll be remembered. It's your failures that'll be remembered. Trust me. Don't live in a bubble. Trauma increases when isolation increases. So some great tips here. I apologize. I'm going to race to this because I want to get to this. There's some pillars that we use at Thrive IT that are really important: mastery, methodology, mindset, and mentoring. But it's more important to me that you make sure you see this. So make sure you stay connected with us. What I'm doing in the near future is going to be really, really challenging for me. But at the same time, it is going to be something where I'm really looking forward to diving more into this trauma. I'm going to be writing a fictional story, and I'm going to actually be creating a series of traumatic events that happen in IT, and we're going to talk about it in this book, and it's going to be very interesting for me to write, and so that's going to be coming up soon, and I'll be wanting to hear more of your stories. So feel free to schedule a Zoom call with me if you want to kind of meet with me and tell me some of your story, in confidence, of course, unless you want to share it with the world, then we can, but feel free to use that link right there, thrive-it.com/meet DJ for 30. It is case sensitive, just so you know. But if you can do that, just schedule time with me, and we will get in this together and see what kind of ways we can help by telling our stories. Finally, one thing to close out. Last year, I did an event only special, and I'm doing it again this year. Only this year, because it's 2022. I'm taking $22 off of the hardcover version of Just Do This. Just for you for attending this talk. Congratulations. You've got until October 30th to use that code. So just go to that link, thrive-it.com/LVSI1, or sorry, LVSI22. Sorry, I can speech today. So yeah, use that code Vision22, and you'll basically get the hardcover for the paperback price. So my gift to you. I just appreciate your time. And if there's anything I can do to help any of you in the future, please do let me know. And we look forward to seeing you on the rest of the talks. So let's all go and see the ending keynote, and hope to see you again out there very soon. Bye, everybody.